Chapter 2. Conception Day. Thank Power. Oh, Marv, it's just you. I let out a long, deep breath. Marv glanced at me. He wrinkled his nose as if he'd just smelled spoiled deer. Course, man, it's my room too, you know. A short, scrawny kid with a clump of black hair that shot up in shocks. He was the game hunter, one of the faction's lowliest jobs. Even though the faction had a food manager who tended both vegetables and chickens in the backyard, Marv set traps and used a fire poker to take down wild animals in the woods nearby. With 10 boys, you could never have enough food. He sat on his bed and stared at a particularly long and wide crack in the wall. He always did that when he caught me studying one of my VOs, but after I stashed the necklace, he had his head in his hands. Nervous about the tournament results, huh? As I said it, sweat broke out of my forehead again. Would Jev get back already? It's not just that, man, Marv said. I turn 16 next week and I still haven't hit puberty yet. Wow. Marv was worried about something other than how our faction placed in the Tournament of Prestige? That would be a first. But I've got to admit it was even more amazing he still had a high voice, was shorter than the 11-year-old housekeeper Pete, and had a chest not much wider than his neck. It was extremely rare a boy didn't hit puberty until the plague finally slew him around the time he turned 17, but supposedly it had happened before. I didn't envy the guy. Marv sighed. I guess the fact that we get the results of the tournament tonight made me think about how, if I don't mature real soon, I'll never get to make a baby to continue my legacy. I fought the urge to roll my eyes. Marv had anything but a legacy in the faction, let alone Middleton, though I guessed that'd change if we won the tournament. I mean, look at this, man. He ran his hand along his cheek. Smooth as a baby's buttock. I chuckled despite myself. Sorry, didn't mean to laugh. Not just because it could come across as mean, but because shaving was a real pain. I bet there'd been a much easier way back in the old world than slicing at your beard with a blade and water. I ran a hand along my own face, which had grown a bit stubbly over the past couple days. Great. No worries, man. You hit puberty like 3 years ago, right? Yeah. Though I'd gone to the reproduction faction when I turned 16 like everyone else, when most kids were done or close to done with puberty. Marv probably wouldn't be by that age, though. Lucky, he said with a sneer. I don't know about that. A lot of good puberty did me. My conception day wasn't exactly the best day of my life, you know. Well, duh, you've never told me about it, no matter how many times I've asked. And for good reason. Come on, man, spill. Never. The last thing I wanted to do was well up all the old feelings again. Just this once. Maybe it'll make me feel better about missing my conception day. You could really help a brother out. What had to be the most encouraging grin he could muster formed on his face. I sighed. He had a good point, and he was a good friend. And maybe I'd even feel a little better if I told him, since I'd never told anybody about that awful day before. Okay, I said. Here goes. I started by telling him how a year ago I'd headed down one of the suburb's cracked, weed-ridden roads toward the reproduction faction. The street was even more remote than the others in the area. Nothing surrounded it but woods full of naked birch trees and tall, thick evergreens for at least a mile in both directions. The fact it wasn't traveled much explained why its sidewalks were still completely intact. It was the same time of year as now, so a light chill stung the air. I placed my arms across my chest, rubbing my elbows to stay warm. Apparently the fact my heart beat as fast as a hummingbird's wings wasn't enough to heat me up. Even though I'd heard all about what you do on Conception Day, not just from lessons in my nature faction, but also from Chud, a guy who was kinda like an older brother to me, my nerves jittered like tree branches caught in a vicious windstorm. There was nothing like knowing you were about to make a baby, even though you'd never actually get to see the kid, or even the girl who'd give birth to it. I tried to take my mind off my nerves by thinking about what kind of baby me and whoever this soon-to-be a mom would have. Would it be a boy or a girl? What skills would it have? What job would it have in a faction? The questions kept rolling around in my head. Not that they really mattered, though. I'd never find any of them out anyway. A bit of a depressing thought, but such was life. Finally, the reproduction faction rose in the near distance on the right side of the road, and a sharp pang struck my chest. I could just make out the design that wrapped around the whole building toward the top, a thin orange line, a much thicker green one below it, and another thin red line below that. In the middle of the design was a large number 7, part of it orange, the rest red. A green word ran across the middle of the 7, but I couldn't read it. Not just because the sign was still too far away, but because I hadn't been taught to read. Only the Middleton rulers knew how, because it was their job to study and read books, those lucky pieces of horse crap. Still, rumors had it that the place used to be called a 7-Eleven back in the old world. Probably at least half true, because of the number 7 on it. Such a bizarre name. What could it even meant back then? I made it to the decent-sized parking lot that spilled out in front of the building and went inside. A dangerously thin boy who looked like boredom would kill him before the plague did, what with his slouched shoulders and eyes that seemed to stare off into the cosmos, stood behind the counter by the door. Empty shelves jutted from the counter. "Faction number?" he asked with a voice even dull would describe as dull. 235. He crossed something off on a piece of yellowed paper. Fantastic. He pushed a blue plastic cup on the counter toward me. "Your girl is already here." Another pang hit my chest. Even though I'd expected it and wouldn't even get to see her, it was still extremely nerve-wracking to know the mother of my child was in this building, right here, right now. "So all you have to do is go to the room that has a door with a male symbol on it, and, you know." He tilted his head to the side. "You don't need me to explain, do you?" "No, I got it, thanks." This was more than awkward enough without him going into any details, but I think I knew why they had this guy stationed here. He seemed like he didn't give a flying piece of horse crap about the whole uneasy situation, and I bet that helped a lot of kids feel more comfortable with it too. "Fantastic," he said, as if it was actually the last word on his mind. "Come back here when you're done." While I headed toward the door at the back of the room, I glanced at the rows of shelves that formed aisles in the faction. Though nothing was on the shelves, I couldn't help but imagine all kinds of food on them, food much more advanced than the kind we'd have now. According to our Nurture faction lessons, people from the old world used to buy food, which came in all kinds of containers, made of plastic, metal, and glass, with some thin papery stuff called money. So bizarre. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't quite picture it all. I glanced at glass doors with shelves behind them, along the far wall of the faction by the door with the male symbol on it. Old world food had been stored in there too. Incredible how the glass doors used to keep it real cold so it didn't go bad. That wasn't the craziest of all, though. Supposedly, there was some machine everyone used to have at their houses that could heat up food with a click of a button, and within just a few minutes. Much faster than Pete could cook a rabbit or chicken. Priceless. But of course, all those machines had long since been taken to the Deluxe family at the mansion, and all the food that used to be here had been snagged when the plague broke out. My head whirled with what the battles that took place here and in other old world food marts must have looked like. The ones even before gangs formed, when regular kids fought and even killed each other over the food. I could still see some of the fallout, as a few of the aisles of shelves had tipped over and a couple glass doors were shattered or splintered. I opened the door with the male symbol on it, just like I'd heard from Chud and the older boys, all of whom were dead now. It led to an old world bathroom, which had barely been used by the public back in the day. It was actually kept up pretty nice. No cracked mirrors or fractured tiles or grime of any kind. The kid at the counter probably cleaned it in his downtime, and I'd bet he described the chore as thrilling in his ridiculously dry voice. I went into a stall, deposited my stuff into the cup. I didn't go into too much detail with this part with Marv, would have been way too embarrassing, and went back to the counter. "Here you go." I set the cup a little too rigidly on the counter. I kind of wished he had a top for it. "Fantastic." The boy still stared deep into outer space. "You're done, kid. I'm authorized to tell you that, as decreed by the Middleton rules, you're obligated to go back to your faction without stopping immediately." He picked up the cup and went to the room with the female symbol on it. The door closed behind him, and I stared as intently as I could at it, like if I concentrated hard enough, I might be able to defy the laws of physics and see the girl inside. The questions just wouldn't exit my head. Who was going to be my baby's mother? What did she look like? Then the kid's words stabbed through my brain. I had to leave. Now. Emptiness wafted through me as I left the reproduction faction and headed back the narrow road toward my faction, but I had to know. I just had to. And this would probably be my only chance, especially since the reproduction faction was on such a remote road. If I was stealthy enough, no one would ever find out. I veered into the woods, my feet sinking into the soft leaf-strewn ground, and hid behind a thick birch tree. The sweet, pungent scent of nearby pines invaded my nose. My breaths came out ragged, even though I'd only walked a few yards. A couple of minutes later, a tall, thin shape came up from the street from the direction of the reproduction faction. The figure had an appealing curve in the middle. Long red hair fell past her shoulders. Yes, a girl. Definitely a girl. I'd seen some out in town, but only at a distance like this. It had to be her. When she made it close enough for me to see her face, every muscle in my body froze. Her blotchy skin was a dark gray like mine, though her hazel eyes sparkled like the red stone on my necklace. An array of light freckles dotted her face and long, slender neck. Her sweatshirt and sweatpants, both ragged in places, hugged her body, emphasizing her curvy figure. A breath wrenched itself from my throat, and the girl jumped back, only a couple yards away. She glanced at the tree. I peeked around, her eyes the size of a spooked horse's. "Who's there?" she asked. "I can see your head, you know." Crap. Might as well show myself. I stepped out from behind the tree. My legs shook like crazy, and I prayed to power she didn't notice. "Sorry. Please don't be afraid. It's just I wanted to see who's going to give birth to my baby, or, our baby, I guess I should say. You know what I mean. Did I have to sound like a complete moron?" The girl's perfect full lips parted as she looked me up and down. Her eyes were even more sparkly than when I first saw them. If I had to choose anyone to have my kid, I honestly didn't think I could have picked anyone more beautiful. My stomach filled with this weird woozy feeling, one I'd never had before. "Please don't tell anyone. I wanted to know who you were," I said just a little too loudly. "I was curious, that's all." She bit her bottom lip, then took a step down the road in the direction she'd been going, as if she wanted to walk away and completely ignore me, but decided not to at the last second. She narrowed her eyes at me. "Curious? You know that's a rather dangerous notion, don't you?" Crap. I shouldn't have said that. "Oh, well, yeah, I guess." She bore her gaze into mine, and I shuddered. This could be bad. This could be real bad. Then she smiled. "You really are curious, aren't you?" Well, yeah. But believe me, I don't mean to be. Again, please don't tell anyone." She giggled. "Oh, no need to worry. I won't tell a soul. For a moment I thought you were some spy from the mansion attempting to unearth criminals by appearing to be a charming, trustworthy citizen, but I can tell you're quite genuine." I tried to hold back a grin. I couldn't argue with her thinking I was charming. Her smile deepened, and the woozy feeling grew. Was this what it felt like to be around a girl? No wonder the Baudelaire family didn't let the sexes intermix. All we want to do is hang out with each other and never get anything done. It's nice to know who my child's father is as well. But her smile faltered, and she glanced in the direction she'd been walking before, as if she still couldn't decide whether to jet or not. I couldn't blame her. It was extremely dangerous to be talking like this in plain sight, but I couldn't fight the feeling it was more than that with her. The way her nose and lips twisted so hard, it almost looked painful. "What's your name?" she asked. "Gorin of, Faction 235. And yours?" "Stausha of Faction 304. It's a pleasure to meet you." Though she bit her bottom lip again before and after she spoke, she sounded genuine enough. You too. So, what do you do exactly? You know, like your job." My face grew warm. "Seriously, could I be any more of a bumbling idiot?" "I'm a supply hunter." "Me too." I've got to admit, even though we just met and talking with her was illegal, it felt right for some reason, despite the fact that she was clearly a bit uncomfortable. Her eyes grew wide. "Wait a moment. Since you hid behind a tree in order to witness the mother of your child, Would it be accurate to deduce that you illegally kept a few VOs for yourself? Perhaps even study them on occasion? All the oxygen gushed out of my lungs. What? More like a squeak than a word. I thought so. She held her open hands out in front of her. Don't be alarmed. I told you I won't tell a soul. Okay. I could trust her. I just knew it. Something about her, but I couldn't put a finger on it. How'd you know? She put her hands on her hips. Well, I assumed somebody who had the gall to covertly try to discover the mother of his child, not to mention was a supply hunter by profession, would also have the audacity to study any VOs he happened to come across. She was smart, all right, not to mention used a lot of fancy words. Where could she have learned them? All I could do was nod. Same with me. Her face brightened, a light pink tinge blooming through the dark gray skin. She seemed to have lost any discomfort she'd had. I absolutely adore objects. I wish I didn't have to keep hiding the ones I have. Me too, I murmured. And I wish I could obtain more. Perhaps even have a house for myself, too. Wouldn't that be marvelous? I continued to jerk my head up and down. This girl was unbelievable. Priceless, even. In ways, she was just like me, but different, too. Incredible. Just between you and me, she said, her eyes rolling toward the sky. One day I plan to escape to the rural region of Middleton, so I can have my own farmhouse. Now that would be precious. Don't you agree? The way she spoke, the words gushing out of her. Clearly she'd never told anybody any of these things before. Of course she couldn't, since she'd get in big trouble. But she obviously thought she could trust me. Goosebumps popped up on my arms. I never thought talking to a girl could be so enthralling. Yeah, definitely, I murmured. Her plan would work too, since nobody lived in the farmhouses on the outskirts of Middleton. As for the rest of the old world state of Pennsylvania, I shivered. No use thinking about that, but Stasha could do it, and she could be safe there. She'd just have to make sure she didn't get caught when she left her faction of girls, and she'd have to be able to survive on her own, of course. The pink tinge faded from her face. She blinked rapidly, her facial features pinched tight. Not again. What was up with her? You seem quite nice, she said, but perhaps we shouldn't be speaking with one another. My heart deflated to half its size. Even though we'd only been talking a short time, I would have talked to her all day. True. It's dangerous, what with the patrol. I could scarcely give a piece of horse crap about the patrol, she hissed, and the infamous rulers for that matter. No doubt about it. This was some girl, all right, but that meant she didn't want to talk with me. If possible, my heart deflated even more. Her face softened. I merely think it's for the best, that's all. But believe me when I say it was truly nice meeting. The sound of wheels crunching over gravel down the street drowned out her words. I whirled and jumped back into the woods. A loud rustle from across the road told me Stasha did the same. When I'd gone a few yards, I turned back around and stayed completely still. Through the cracks and layers of vegetation, I could barely make out a black and white patrol car pulled by horses roll past along the street and out of sight. Mother of power. That had been close. When the patrol car left, I told Marf back in our bedroom. I went back to the road, but Stasha was gone. Hollowness filled me. It was horrible. She didn't even look back. Marf shook his head as he lay on his bed. I can't say I feel bad for you, man. I mean, you basically found a girl as crazy as you. Whatever, Marf. It's not just that I'll never see her again. I'll also never get to see my kid. This Marf knew. Right after a baby was born, kids called Razors took care of it in a nurture faction. When it turned 10, the Razors shuttled it to a regular faction, one that needed somebody with whatever talents it had and skills it had learned at the nurture faction. Of course, by then, both its parents had long since died from the plague around 17 years old. Usually within a month or so of their birthdays, though sometimes, very rarely, kids died a little outside of that time frame. You have no idea what it's like to have a kid and never be able to see it. Not even once. Marf lolled his head from side to side. Well, I thought about that before, but still, it's gotta be pretty precious knowing somebody's out there who came from you and who will continue your bloodline. I shrugged. Not really. If I could, I'd try to figure out what nurture faction my kid lived in right now and go see him or her, but obviously that's illegal. Like that'd stop me, but I didn't tell Marf that. And I don't know how I'd do it or if I could even figure out where. He scowled. Well, I'd never do that. He softened his voice. But I know what you mean, man. At least you got to see a girl, though. True. People who weren't supply hunters were much less likely to catch a glimpse of the opposite sex, so Marf had never seen a girl before, though he'd heard from me and others just how priceless they were to look at least from a distance. I lay down and stared up at the ceiling. Yeah, and now I'll never see her again. No matter how hard I tried over the past few months, I just couldn't get over that. Silence filled the room, and seemed to enter the melancholy hole I'd just reopened. I'd do anything to look at her delicate, freckled face again. Talk to her. Well, that's probably for the best, Marv said. You're playing a risky game hiding those VOs as it is, man. You get caught and you'll get convicted of LYN for sure, which I've got to admit I'm thinking you have. Great. Here we go again. I don't have LYN, Marf. I must have told him this 1,000 times. No way I had last year neglect, the disease some people got when they turned 16 and started to not give a crap what they did anymore. I didn't act as if everything lost meaning to me, and I had to do things that got me extremely excited before I died. But how to get that through Marf's sometimes pebble-sized brain? It's not like I'm slacking off at my job, I said. I've gotten a bunch of precious VOs lately, and it's not like I've been putting random things in the fireplace when no one's looking just to see how they burn. Rumor had it a fair amount of people had done that over the past 100 years, ever since the plague broke out. Supposedly a few years ago some jerk burned down his faction house, ended up killing 5 people including himself. No way in the history of Middleton would I ever be that careless. Maybe, Marv said, but those VOs under your bed are real suspicious if you ask me, man. Hey, you know I've had those for years. I don't know. I've just always been interested in them. You have to admit you have at least some curiosity about them, right? Of course not, man. Right. All his life Marf had never admitted that. No idea why I thought he might then. Curiosity's a disease, if you ask me. I don't get why you're so hung up on those stupid VOs, man. We've all got jobs, and studying those objects is for the Middleton rulers to do, got it? His spittle flew across the room. Okay, I get it. No use arguing when he started to spit. Still, sometimes I couldn't help but think maybe it'd be better to be a game hunter like Marf. I wouldn't win any prestige points, so I wouldn't get much respect from my faction, but being trapped in the woods all day meant I wouldn't see any girls or VOs, and that meant I wouldn't constantly be tempted to study or explore either of those things. Overall, it'd be a much less agonizing life. Marf sucked in a long breath. I just hope we won this year's tournament, man. I can just see my name in big black ink on our flag, you know? A dreamy look came over his face, and an image hit me. Every faction's flag waving in the breeze on its pole in Middleton Township Park, a couple streets away. Marf would probably die right now just to get his name on ours. Even though nobody in Middleton could read except the Badalux family, there had to be nothing like seeing what your name actually looked like, not to mention having the Middleton rulers raise it on your faction's flag for all to see. I tried to imagine what Gorin looked like, but all I could see was a crazy scribble that made no sense to me. I admit that'd be priceless, I said. But for me, the real prize is the tour of the mansion. Another plus of winning the Tournament of Prestige, and the only thing I had to do before I died in a couple of months. If I couldn't study all the precious VOs in the manor, at least I'd get to see it in the VOs rumored to be in its property, especially since they were supposedly the most incredible ones in town, now that most of the VOs in Middleton had already been found by past generations of supply hunters. Really? Marf asks. Even more than getting to stay in the winner's mansion? No doubt the last prize would be awesome too, getting to live with Marf and the rest of my faction members as the champions in another manor near the Badalux families, and for the whole next year. We wouldn't have to work anymore since the rulers would have servants clean the place every day and give us food on a daily basis. I've got to admit, even though I'd only live in the Winter's Mansion for 2 months instead of the whole year if our faction won, it would be pretty priceless. But if we didn't win this year's tournament, I'd never get to see any of those things. My insides twisted as if garter snakes, the type Marf sometimes caught in the meadow nearby, were squeezing them hard. I had to know if we'd won. I had to know right now.